The air raid sirens wailed across the French countryside as Simone Zimmerman huddled beneath her desk in the small village schoolhouse. It was late spring of 1940, and the Germans were advancing through northern France with alarming speed. The children had been sent home days ago, but Simone had remained behind, sorting through records before the inevitable evacuation order came. "Mademoiselle Zimmerman." The school's caretaker burst through the door. "You must come to the shelter immediately." Simone grabbed her satchel, stuffing in the last of the student papers. At 25, she had spent the past 3 years teaching English and mathematics to the village children. Now, war threatened everything she had built. "The Germans will be here by nightfall," the caretaker warned, ushering her out. Simone clutched her coat around her slender frame. "I can't leave yet. My father's letters, they're still at the house. There's no time." But Simone was already running down the cobblestone street toward her small cottage. The distant rumble of artillery punctuated her footsteps. Father had fought in the Great War, and his letters to mother were all she had left of either of them. She would not abandon them to the Germans. Inside her cottage, Simone frantically pulled open drawers, gathering the bundle of yellowed envelopes and placing them in a small wooden box. A photograph of her parents on their wedding day slipped from between the pages, her mother beautiful in her simple dress, her father handsome in uniform. Both lost to the influenza epidemic of 31. The cottage shook as a bomb dropped in the distance. Simone tucked the box into her satchel and hurried outside, only to be knocked to the ground by an explosion that ripped through the air mere streets away. The world turned to dust and smoke. When she opened her eyes, German vehicles were rolling into the village square. Simone pressed herself against a wall, watching soldiers fan out through the streets. She had been taught that Germans were monsters, but these men looked like exhausted, ordinary soldiers, until their commanding officer barked orders and their faces hardened into the mechanical precision she had been warned about. This was the enemy. These men had marched across Europe, destroying everything in their path. Simone's grip tightened on her satchel. She had survived losing her parents, she would survive this occupation. The key was to become invisible, to feel nothing, to connect with no one. In war, attachments were dangerous, they made you vulnerable. She had learned that lesson when her parents died, leaving her alone in the world. The Germans commandeered the mayor's house and the school. By nightfall, they had established a headquarters, and Simone watched from her window as soldiers patrolled the streets. She had considered fleeing, but where would she go? Paris was in chaos, and the roads were clogged with refugees who were easy targets for German planes. Better to wait, to survive, to give them no reason to notice her. She would endure, as she always had, by relying on no one but herself. Dawn broke on the second day of occupation, and Simone ventured out for water. The village pump stood in the square, now overlooked by a German checkpoint. She kept her eyes down as she approached, her threadbare coat pulled tight. "Halt!" A soldier stepped forward, rifle at the ready. "Papers." Simone produced her identity card with trembling hands. The soldier examined it closely. "English teacher?" "Yes," she whispered. "You will report to headquarters at noon. Commandant Krauser wishes to speak with all educated civilians." Simone nodded, her mouth dry. As she filled her bucket, she noticed a different soldier watching her, tall, with thoughtful blue eyes that didn't match her image of a Nazi. He looked away when she caught his gaze. At noon, Simone presented herself at the school, now transformed into a military office. 5 other villagers waited in what had been her classroom. Maps covered the walls where children's artwork had once hung. The door opened, and a stern officer entered. "I am Commandant Krauser. This village is now under German protection." He paced slowly. We require interpreters and administrative staff. Those who cooperate will receive extra rations. Simone stared at the floor. Collaboration meant survival, but at what cost? Fraulein Zimmerman. The commandant stopped before her. You speak English and French. You will assist Lieutenant König with civilian communications. Before she could respond, the door opened again, and the soldier with the thoughtful eyes entered. Lieutenant König. He saluted sharply. Lieutenant, this is your translator. Begin cataloguing village resources immediately. Simone felt the lieutenant's eyes on her as they left the school. His uniform was immaculate, his posture rigid, but there was a hesitancy in his movements that seemed at odds with his military bearing. We will start with the medical supplies, he said in precise French. His voice was softer than she expected. There isn't much, she replied coldly. The pharmacy was depleted before your arrival. He regarded her for a moment. Nevertheless, we must document what remains. At the pharmacy, the owner watched with undisguised hatred as Lieutenant König inventoried supplies. Simone translated mechanically, maintaining as much distance as possible from the German officer. He was the enemy, regardless of his civil tone or those unsettlingly human eyes. Ask him about medicines for children, the lieutenant said suddenly. Simone blinked in surprise before translating. The pharmacist shrugged. All gone. Lieutenant König frowned. There is a supply truck arriving tomorrow. Children's medicines will be included. He turned to Simone. Tell him that. She translated, watching confusion cross the pharmacist's face. That evening, Simone returned to her cottage, troubled by the unexpected exchange. The Germans were bringing medicine? It contradicted everything she believed about the enemy. But perhaps it was merely a strategy to pacify the population. Attachments and trust were luxuries she couldn't afford, especially with Germans. The next morning, Lieutenant König was waiting when she arrived at headquarters. We are taking inventory of the school library today, he announced. Simone felt a stab of alarm. Why? To determine what materials are appropriate for continued education. Her books. They would burn her books. The children have been evacuated. Some remain. And more will return as the situation stabilizes. In the library, Lieutenant König examined the shelves with careful attention. He pulled down a copy of Remarks All Quiet on the Western Front. This is banned in Germany, he said, turning it over in his hands. Simone steeled herself. Will you burn it? He looked up, something like sadness crossing his face. No. But it must be kept from public view. He placed it in a separate pile, then added, almost to himself, it was one of my father's favorite books. Your father read banned books? He stiffened. My father was a professor of literature before. He stopped abruptly. We should continue. As they worked, Simone noticed his careful handling of the books, the way he occasionally paused to read a passage. This didn't match her image of Germans as cultural destroyers. You enjoy reading? She asked despite herself. A hint of a smile touched his lips. I studied literature at university before the war. What did you hope to become? A teacher, like my father. His smile faded. But then came duty. Simone's resolve wavered. This man had dreams that echoed her own, before war redirected his path. It was disorienting to see humanity in the enemy. As they left the school, an explosion rocked the village square. A German supply truck had struck a buried mine. Soldiers scrambled to respond. Stay back! Lieutenant König pushed Simone behind a wall as secondary explosions sent shrapnel flying. When the chaos subsided, wounded soldiers lay scattered across the square. Lieutenant König rushed to help, shouting orders. Simone found herself moving forward, her teacher's instinct to help overriding her determination to remain detached. A young German soldier clutched his blooded leg, face contorted in pain. Simone knelt beside him, tearing her scarf to fashion a tourniquet. The soldier looked at her in surprise, mumbling what sounded like thanks in German. Lieutenant König appeared at her side, his uniform now stained with blood. "You are helping." Simone didn't answer, focusing on tightening the tourniquet. "The medical supplies I promised will not come today," he said quietly. "But there is a cache of medicines in the truck that survived. For the children." Simone looked up, meeting his gaze. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you saw a wounded man, not a German soldier." He held out a small package. "Antibiotics and fever reducers. For the children." Simone hesitated before accepting it. Their fingers brushed, and she was struck by the warmth of his hand. He was a man, not a uniform. The realization was as unsettling as it was undeniable. That night, Simone delivered medicine to families with sick children. Each grateful smile chipped away at her certainty that isolation was the only way to survive. When she returned home, she found a book on her doorstep, a collection of French poetry. Inside the cover, a note in elegant handwriting: "Literature reminds us of our shared humanity. QK? Lieutenant Quentin König." She ran her fingers over the name, feeling the dangerous stirring of connection. Over the following weeks, Simone continued her reluctant work as translator. Each day with Lieutenant König revealed new contradictions, his strict adherence to military protocol alongside small acts of kindness toward villagers. He ensured rations were distributed fairly and intervened when other soldiers became too harsh in their enforcement of curfew. One rainy afternoon, they sheltered in a church doorway after inspecting the village mill. Thunder rolled overhead, matching the distant artillery fire. "You disappeared during the Great War," Simone said abruptly. "Pardon?" "My father wrote to my mother that the enemy disappeared when you looked them in the eyes. They became men, not Germans." She met his gaze. "I never understood until now." Lieutenant König was silent for a moment. "My father said something similar about Frenchmen. He came home broken from that war. Mine didn't come home at all." Rain streamed down the church steps. Lieutenant König removed his coat and held it over her head as they dashed to the next building. The unexpected gentleness of the gesture left Simone speechless. That evening, she found another book at her door, this time English poetry. The note read, "Words bridge what armies divide. Tomorrow, Northwards, noon. If you wish to speak freely, away from German ears." Simone knew she should report this. Unauthorized meetings with German officers could mark her as a collaborator, or worse, if anyone suspected deeper involvement. Yet something pulled her toward the woods beyond rational caution. At noon the next day, she slipped away from the village, following the path into the dense forest. Lieutenant König waited in a small clearing, out of uniform for the first time. In civilian clothes, he looked younger, the rigid military bearing replaced by a scholar's slight stoop. "You came," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I shouldn't have. Nor should I have asked." He gestured to a fallen log. "But I needed to speak with you as Quentin, not Lieutenant König." They sat, maintaining a proper distance between them. The forest was quiet, the war momentarily held at bay by ancient trees. "I did not choose this uniform," he said finally. "I was a student when the war began. My father opposed the regime and was sent to Dachau in '37. I joined the Wehrmacht hoping to protect what remained of my family from similar fate. Simone studied his profile. Why tell me this? Because when you translate my orders, I see your judgment. I see how you look at this uniform and what it represents. His eyes met hers. And I find I cannot bear for you to see me only as the enemy. What should I see instead? A man caught in history's machinery, trying to preserve something human within himself. His honesty stripped away her defenses. I lost my parents to illness. I decided then that attachment was dangerous, that to survive, I must depend on no one. Yet you risk meeting an enemy soldier alone in the woods. I don't know why I came, she whispered. But she did know. Something was growing between them, something impossible and dangerous and real. In his presence, her carefully constructed walls were crumbling, revealing a loneliness she had denied for years. They began meeting weekly in the woods, exchanging books and conversations that strayed increasingly from the safe territory of literature into personal history. Quentin spoke of his childhood in Dresden, his professor father's quiet resistance to Nazi ideology, his mother's death from tuberculosis. Simone shared stories of her parents, her dreams of someday opening a proper school of her own. In these stolen hours, the war receded. They were simply Quentin and Simone, not German and French, not lieutenant and translator, but two souls finding unexpected connection amid chaos. On a warm June afternoon, nearly 2 months into the occupation, they sat beneath an oak tree, discussing Dickens. Quentin had brought bread and cheese, a luxury in ration times. "The commandant is being replaced," he said suddenly. "His replacement arrives next week, a Major Hoffman, rumored to be a dedicated Nazi Party member." Simone felt cold despite the summer warmth. What does that mean for the village? Harsher policies. Stricter enforcement. His hand covered hers briefly. More dangerous for anyone suspected of harboring anti-German sentiments. Or for officers who show too much humanity. Quentin nodded gravely. "I've requested transfer to the Eastern Front." "The Russian front." Simone's voice caught. "That's a death sentence, they say." His smile was bleak. "Better than becoming what Hoffman will demand of his officers." "There must be another way." "There isn't." He hesitated. "Unless." "Unless what?" "There are those in the Wehrmacht who share my views. A network that helps certain officers disappear. New identities, passage to neutral countries." "Desertion," she whispered. "Yes." The word hung between them, weighted with implication. Desertion meant execution if caught. It meant turning his back on the oath he had taken, even if that oath had been given under duress. "Why tell me this?" she asked. Quentin's eyes held hers. "Because I cannot leave without saying goodbye. Because these past weeks, talking with you, sharing books, seeing France through your eyes, it has been the only light in this darkness." The confession hung in the air between them. Simone felt something inside her breaking open, years of careful isolation crumbling in the face of this impossible connection. "When would you go?" she asked. "Tomorrow night. There's a rendezvous point near the Swiss border." He took a breath. Simone, if circumstances were different, she pressed her fingers against his lips, stopping the word she wasn't ready to hear. "No promises. Not in war." His hand caught hers, holding it against his chest. Through his shirt, she felt the steady beating of his heart. Their eyes met, and the space between them seemed to dissolve. His lips found hers in a kiss that felt like both a beginning and an ending. That night, Simone couldn't sleep. The memory of Quentin's kiss lingered, along with the knowledge that by tomorrow, he would be gone. If captured, he would face a firing squad. If successful, he would begin a new life in Switzerland, either way, beyond her reach. She had spent years believing that emotional detachment was the key to survival. Now, faced with losing Quentin, she realized that surviving was not the same as living. These weeks of connection had awakened something she had long suppressed, the courage to feel, to risk, to open herself to both joy and pain. Dawn found her at her table, writing furiously. If this was goodbye, there were things she needed him to know. How his kindness had challenged her prejudice. How their conversations had restored her faith in human connection. How, in finding him, she had rediscovered parts of herself long buried. She sealed the letter and tucked it into a copy of Pride and Prejudice they had discussed weeks earlier. She would find a way to deliver it before his departure. But she never got the chance. That afternoon, Major Hoffman arrived a day earlier than expected. His first act was to gather the villagers in the square for an announcement. Resistance elements have been active in this region, he declared in harsh German, with a soldier translating. Henceforth, any citizen found aiding the resistance will be shot. Any citizen withholding information will be shot. Simone scanned the gathered soldiers for Quentin but didn't see him. Fear clutched at her heart. After the announcement, she hurried toward the school headquarters, the book with her letter hidden in her satchel. A commotion near the building made her pause. Soldiers were escorting someone out, Quentin, his face bruised, hands bound behind his back. Major Hoffman followed, pointing at Quentin and shouting. Though Simone couldn't understand the German, the situation was clear. Somehow, Quentin's plans had been discovered. She pressed herself against a wall, watching helplessly as they loaded him into a truck. Their eyes met briefly across the square. Despite his battered face, he gave her the smallest shake of his head, a warning to stay away, to not reveal their connection. The truck drove off, taking Quentin to what she feared would be his execution. Simone clutched her satchel, the undelivered letter burning inside like an accusation. She had finally opened her heart, only to have it shattered by war's cruel reality. That night, Simone made a decision. She couldn't save Quentin by remaining safely detached. If there was even a chance he was still alive, she had to try. She knew one person who might help, Dr. Laurent, the village physician who secretly treated resistance fighters. At great risk, she went to his house after curfew. They took Lieutenant König, she explained after the doctor let her in. He was planning to desert to help the village when the new commander arrived. Dr. Laurent studied her intently. "And why do you care what happens to a German officer, Mademoiselle Zimmerman?" Simone met his gaze. "Because he showed me that humanity can persist even in inhumanity." The doctor's expression softened. "The resistance has contacts within the German military police. I can make inquiries, but it will take time." Where would they take him? Regional headquarters in Lyon, most likely. But Simone, even if we learn his location, what then? A rescue would be nearly impossible. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I can't do nothing." For the next week, Simone maintained her role as translator under Major Hoffman's cold scrutiny. Each day brought new hardships to the village, increased food requisitions, arrests of suspected resistance sympathizers, midnight raids on homes. Finally, Dr. Laurent summoned her with news. "Your lieutenant is alive. He's being held for court-martial in Lyon. The trial is in 3 days. Court-martial means execution, almost certainly. But there might be a chance." He explained that a resistance cell was planning to attack the convoy taking prisoners from Lyon to Paris. "If your lieutenant is among them, and if he's identified to the resistance fighters beforehand." It was the slimmest of hopes, but Simone seized it. "What must I do?" Get this information to our contact in Lyon. He handed her a sealed envelope. But Simone, if you're caught with this. She thought of Quentin facing a firing squad alone. I understand the risk. The journey to Lyon was perilous. Simone traveled with false papers provided by Dr. Laurent, claiming she was visiting an ill aunt. German checkpoints lined the roads, and each inspection brought her heart to her throat. The envelope with resistance information was sewn into the lining of her coat, along with her letter to Quentin. In Lyon, she found the resistance contact, a bookseller whose shop served as a message center. He took the envelope with a nod of acknowledgement. The prisoner you inquired about, he said carefully, will be moved tomorrow at dawn. Our friends will be watching the road. Can I see him before? Simone asked, desperate for even a glimpse of Quentin. The bookseller shook his head. Impossible. The prison is too heavily guarded. He hesitated. Mademoiselle, you should return to your village. What happens tomorrow is no place for a schoolteacher. But Simone couldn't leave, not when Quentin's fate hung in the balance. She spent a sleepless night in a small boarding house, praying that the resistance plan would succeed. Dawn found her waiting near the road leading from Lyon, hidden in a stand of trees where the bookseller had told her the attack would occur. The morning mist shrouded the countryside, turning familiar shapes into ghostly silhouettes. The distant rumble of trucks broke the silence. Simone pressed herself against a tree trunk as a convoy of 3 military vehicles approached. Somewhere in those trucks was Quentin, bound for a Paris prison and then execution. The lead truck passed her position. Then the second. As the third approached, gunfire erupted from the hillside. Resistance fighters emerged from hiding places, firing at the German drivers and guards. The ensuing battle was chaotic, shouting, gunfire, the crash of a truck veering off the road. Simone covered her ears, heart pounding as she watched the resistance fighters overpower the German escorts and begin freeing the prisoners. She scanned the emerging figures desperately. Most wore civilian clothes, but one was in a tattered German uniform, Quentin, his face gaunt but unmistakable. A resistance fighter approached him cautiously, saying something Simone couldn't hear. Quentin nodded, and the fighter pointed toward the woods, toward her hiding place. Quentin began running in her direction as the other prisoners were led away. Behind him, shouts indicated German reinforcements were approaching. The resistance fighters melted back into the countryside, their mission completed. Simone! Quentin's voice carried across the distance between them. She emerged from her hiding place, running toward him. They collided in an embrace born of desperation and relief, holding each other as gunfire continued in the distance. You shouldn't be here, he said against her hair. If they find you, I couldn't let you die. He pulled back, cupping her face. We have minutes, perhaps seconds, before they secure this area. The resistance has arranged passage to Switzerland, but, take me with you, Simone said, the words escaping before she could consider their implications. Quentin stared at her. You would leave everything? Your school, your village. There is nothing for me there without you. She pressed her letter into his hand. I wrote this thinking I would never see you again. Everything I feel is in these pages. He tucked the letter into his pocket without reading it. Switzerland, then Sweden. We would be refugees, starting with nothing. Not nothing. She touched his face. Not alone. The sound of approaching vehicles spurred them into action. Hand in hand, they ran deeper into the forest, following the escape route the resistance had planned. Behind them, German soldiers combed the area where the attack had occurred. Their journey was arduous, traveling by night, hiding by day, relying on resistance-safe houses. Each step took them closer to the Swiss border and further from the life Simone had known. Yet for the first time since her parents' death, she felt she was moving toward something, not merely surviving. At a farmhouse near the border, they rested before the final, most dangerous crossing. Quentin finally read her letter by candlelight, his expression softening with each page. "I never thought to find this in war," he said when he finished. "Someone who sees beyond the uniform to the man beneath. And I never thought to find someone who would make me risk everything for connection." She took his hands. "My parents' letters taught me that love is what survives when everything else is lost. I was afraid to believe it until I met you." That night, they shared their first and perhaps last moment of peace, holding each other as the world burned around them. If caught crossing the border, they would face execution, he for desertion, she for aiding him. Yet in each other's arms, the fear receded, replaced by a certainty that whatever came, they had already won something precious from war's destruction. Dawn brought the final test, a crossing through mountain paths to neutral Switzerland. Their guide, a weathered farmer who knew every trail, led them through forests and across streams, avoiding German patrols. "The border is just beyond that ridge," the guide said, pointing to a wooded hillside. "But the Germans patrol heavily. We must time our crossing perfectly." They waited in tense silence as the guide studied the movements of distant soldiers. Simone clutched the wooden box containing her father's letters, the only possession she had brought besides the clothes on her back. "Now!" The guide's urgent whisper sent them scrambling up the slope. They were halfway across the clearing when a shout rang out. German soldiers had spotted them. Gunfire erupted, bullets striking trees around them. "Run!" Quentin pushed Simone ahead as he turned to face the soldiers. "No!" She grabbed his arm. "Together!" They ran, hand in hand, as bullets tore through the air around them. The Swiss border lay just ahead, a simple marker in the earth that meant the difference between death and life. A bullet grazed Simone's arm, causing her to stumble. Quentin caught her, half carrying her the final distance. They crossed the border as German soldiers reached the edge of the clearing, weapons raised. But they didn't fire. International incident prevented them from shooting across the border into neutral territory. Simone and Quentin collapsed on Swiss soil, breathless, wounded, but alive. Swiss border guards appeared, stern but not hostile, helping them to a border station where their wounds were treated. As refugees, they faced uncertainty, but they had escaped the machinery of war that had threatened to destroy them. 70 years later, an attic in that small French village would yield a wooden box, overlooked during the hasty departure of a schoolteacher in 1940. Inside, a father's letters from the Great War, and nestled among them, a single unopened envelope addressed at Lieutenant Quentin König in a woman's elegant hand. The letter never delivered was one Simone had written the night before their planned meeting in the woods, a letter of farewell she hadn't needed to give him. Instead, she had written another, the one she pressed into his hand during their escape, the one that traveled with them to Switzerland, then Sweden, and finally to America, where they built a new life together after the war. But this first undelivered letter, this testament to a love that seemed impossible amid hatred, remained in France, a silent witness to how humanity persisted in war's darkest hours, waiting 7 decades to be discovered and tell its story of how two people from enemy nations found in each other not hatred, but healing, not division, but unity, not war's destruction, but love's creation.